Hey guys, it's me, Cyrus. Well, I wanted to make a video talking about this situation regarding Dolphin and emulation and this whole basically just talk about all this crap that's been going on because there's been a lot of information that's been flowing around and a lot of confusion, I think, and some hot takes, some very strong opinions from other YouTubers, some of which are people that I watch their stuff, and I might consider them to be friendly with me, or and then some people that maybe I don't really know that well, but are pretty big YouTubers who have been around for a while. Anyway, so modern vintage gamer, which is a guy that I watch quite a bit, really good content on his channel. He's been around for a long time. He actually has coded a lot of things. Very smart guy. Got a lot going on his channel. Really good guy. So I'll put a link in the description for him because I think it's really relevant to this situation, because he's sort of become sort of the lightning rod for a lot of different people's opinions about what's gone on here. If you don't know what happened, you're not alone, because the actual information has been pretty convoluted. It involves an emulator called Dolphin, which is an emulator that can play GameCube games and Wii games. It's a very good emulator. I've done videos using Dolphin on this channel. I love that emulator very much. I very much enjoyed having it on my Xbox Series S until Microsoft decided that wasn't cool. And Microsoft decided to remove my ability to do that without going through their whole developer mode thing. So anyway, that's a separate issue. But so Dolphin's cool. I always liked Dolphin. And I didn't realize until very recently, until all this sort of blew up, that Dolphin had some problems. As awesome as that emulator is, and as capable as it is for, allowing you to play these retro games at a higher resolution with, texture packs, all kinds of really awesome stuff. As great as it is, and it is great, it apparently has some hidden stuff in the source code that is questionably copyrighted by Nintendo. These are encryption keys for Wii games, and these keys are not open source. These keys are not public domain information. These keys are actually copyrighted. I mean, that's the interpretation at this point, that these keys are copyrighted and owned by Nintendo as part of their security measures, as far as their security circumvention process, or something to that effect. So using these keys in your emulator, baking them into your source code, is not a good idea. Is it illegal? Well, that apparently is something that has not been challenged in the courts effectively. So there's some question about legality, whether you could get away with it or not get away with it. And Nintendo has the interpretation, and I'm sure there's a lot of other companies that have the interpretation, that using those keys in your source code is probably not legal. And I think that a lot of people that have taken a look at this particular type of situation would agree with that, because those keys they're not just some the keys are very specific. The keys are a very specific string of information, and generally speaking, a very specific string of information is copyrightable. That's something that can be copyrighted, whether you're talking about the words in a novel, the lyrics in a song, the code in a game. It can be copyrighted. So if anybody was interested in challenging that idea, I think that they would be opening a can of worms they probably do not want to, because they probably will not win that battle. Because pretty much every major publisher that owns copyrights is going to have a problem with that, with challenging that idea. Anyway, so let's just say, for the sake of argument, that though that encryption keys that are created by a company, those are probably owned by that company, right? So this was probably not a great idea to incorporate these as part of the emulator itself. I'm really not sure why they decided to do that with Dolphin, because this is not something that you see with emulators. This is not something you see, at least I'm not aware of this sort of thing being commonplace in other emulators. Now, maybe I'm wrong about that, and this is something that other emulators have been doing as well. And if it is, there's a problem. Okay, there's a problem. That could be a serious issue. But we're not going to get into like the too deep into the woods with that, because I really don't know what's up completely there. But I will tell you that a lot of the information regarding this particular situation has been misunderstood, misconstrued, misinterpreted, and frankly, there's been some really strange opinions that have been thrown around. And it's because we really didn't have the full story. We really probably even now still don't have the full story, so this could continue to develop, and what we understand at this point could be corrected even further. But I'll give you this breakdown based on what this guy right here, this Pierre Bourdon, is trying to tell us about what he thinks has happened in this particular situation. Pierre is somebody who has been close to the Dolphin team, has been involved with them in the past, seems to have some pretty good insight into what happened here. It's very interesting because what actually went down is a lot different than what I think a lot of us thought went down in this situation. So I think the general interpretation of what we thought had happened here was Dolphin submitted their emulator for publication on Steam, and Steam was going to put it up. Steam was going to put Dolphin on there, and Nintendo swooped in and said, no, this is against our stuff, and here's a DMCA takedown. You better take this off of here or else. And so Steam took it off, and that's really not what happened. Apparently what happened was, and I'll go through the timeline here that was explained as far as what Pierre is trying to say. And I'll just read this. He says, in this case, none of the process was followed. To the best of my understanding, this is what happened. One, Valve Legal contacted Nintendo of America to ask, hey, what do you think about Dolphin? So, according to this, Valve initiated contact with Nintendo. They reached out to Nintendo and said, hey, we're getting ready to put this thing up on Steam. What do you think about this? That's interesting that contact was initiated by Valve, not by Dolphin, and the team at Dolphin, and not by Nintendo. Okay, so in response to this contact, hey, what do you think about Dolphin? Nintendo replied to Valve, we think it's bad. I mean, this is just like a summarization. We think it's bad, and also that it violates the DMCA anti-circumvention provisions. Note nothing about the violating copyright itself. Also, please take it down. Okay? So, Valve Legal takes it down and forwards Nintendo's reply to Dolphin. Okay, so if this is true, then basically what happened was, before Valve published it, they reached out to Nintendo on their own. And Nintendo, then in response to that question from Valve, says, hey, we think it's bad, and it violates the DMC anti-circumvention provisions, and would you please take it down? And that's what happened. Nintendo didn't issue some like dogmatic like command that Valve comply with, or else there was no like threat from Nintendo. There was no overreaching like iron fisted, and believe me, I'm somebody who's grown up with Nintendo and I'm very familiar with their endless history of litigation. I'm absolutely my initial response to this whole situation was I thought, oh man, Nintendo being Nintendo, Nintendo being Nintendo. And then I read about it and I watched the videos about it and I started to understand that if this is true, then it's very interesting because that's not what happened at all. Nintendo, everybody was like, oh, Nintendo must have been like pouring through the source code. Nintendo must have all these people working behind the scenes, just looking for anything they can find and going through all these emulators and picking them apart and trying to figure out how they can get rid of them. And, you know, getting in, and this is a beginning of a tidal wave of Nintendo action where they're going to go after all the emulators, and, you know, everybody runs to their corners and puts up their shields and gets ready to go to war, basically. And this is like the entire thing is initiated by Valve as a question about this emulator that they're getting ready to put up. And Nintendo's response is like, yeah, we don't like it. We don't think it's good. We think it might not be, it might not even, I don't even know if Nintendo's saying they think it's illegal. They're just saying they think it violates the DMCA's definition of what an anti-circumvention provision is. So basically, Nintendo's saying we think this violates what has been classified as something that it goes against a measure that we put in place to protect our software. Okay, and then they asked him to take it down. They didn't say you must take. Here's a whatever. You know, boom, stamp, hard red letter stamp. You know, do what we say. Here's an affidavit and a summons. You know, that's not what happened. Which is very interesting. Yeah, so he says this is very much not a Section 512 takedown, just standard legal removals, cease and desist between two companies. So that's very interesting. Yeah. So he goes on to explain more about what his thoughts are and various things about all this sort of stuff and the legalities of things. And everybody has an opinion. There's tons of opinions. There's tons of thoughts about all this kind of stuff. What it comes down to is this particular situation for this particular emulator. They put stuff in Dolphin they should not have put in Dolphin. That's what it boils down to. There was really, I'm kind of at a loss as to why they decided that it would be a good idea to include in the source code of this emulator this stuff. And what's fascinating to me about this is it's been in there for years, and they have been warned about it years ago by other people who have been telling this team, this Dolphin team, hey, you probably need to get this out of your emulator. It's going to be trouble down the road. It's probably not worth even trying to fight this battle. Is it a battle you could win? I mean, there's a possibility, but that battle's not going to be surrendered easily. Okay? And you may not win. And in fact, a lot of people think you probably wouldn't win. Okay? Because what you're talking about is the definition of copyrighted material. And I just don't understand why it was left in there as long as it has been left in there. And what's interesting is, there was no like specific like point by point breakdown from Nintendo explaining they have this and this and this and this, and here's the reasons, and they need, citing all the reasons why this is violating their ownership, copyright stuff. It was just this general like question sent from Valve over to Nintendo, and Nintendo's response was very like, to me, I mean we're just kind of going by what we're reading and what we're hearing here, but it seems almost like this was a casual response from Nintendo for a question about something that, I mean, Nintendo's always going to give you that kind of, any company that's trying to protect their assets is probably going to give you that kind of an answer, right? I'm just saying. Now, Nintendo has gone on to further elaborate some of their thoughts on things. Okay, I'm just going to read you this. This is from thegamer.com. Nintendo breaks its silence on the recent legal action against the popular emulator Dolphin. In a statement, Nintendo says it is, quote, committed to protecting the hard work and creativity of its developers, arguing that the emulator, quote, harms the studio and stifles innovation. This is despite Dolphin only supporting games that were released on now dead consoles, the Wii and GameCube. Very few titles from this era are available to purchase and play legitimately, with emulation often being the only way to avoid going through scalpers. Okay. Let me go on. It says Nintendo is committed to protecting the hard work and creativity of video game engineers and developers, says a Nintendo spokesperson in a statement sent to Kotaku. This emulator illegally circumvents Nintendo's protection measures and runs illegal copies of games. Using illegal emulators or illegal copies of games harms development and ultimately stifles innovation. Nintendo respects intellectual property rights of other companies, and in turn it expects others to do the same. Yeah. So basically, Dolphin is yet to respond to this legal pressure from Nintendo, but has said that it is currently investigating its options. Because of this, the Steam release of Dolphin has been definitely postponed. So let me back up just a second here, and let's talk in a reasonable adult way about what Nintendo is actually saying here. It's weird to be on this side of this issue because I'm very aware and have been very aware for my whole life about Nintendo's, you know, Nintendo's tendency over the decades to overreach and to try to crush other companies through litigation. I mean, Nintendo's famous for this. I mean, we remember even as far back as the NES back in the old days, with the Game Genie and everything that happened with all the stuff around that time. Anyway, so we know Nintendo and their history. So it does feel strange for me to kind of be on the other side of this issue and kind of actually taking Nintendo's side. So let me explain where I think Nintendo is messing up as far as their messaging here. Emulators on their own are perfectly legal. There's no legal precedent and no legal justification for saying that an emulator is illegal. Emulation has been fantastic for preserving video games and for giving gamers of all ages an opportunity to experience these games when they otherwise would not be able to do that. Emulation has been extremely important in creating this massive retro video game genre that we all love so much. So I have absolutely, obviously, no problem with emulators. I use emulators. I love emulators. The issue is not emulation. The issue is, number one, the way this particular emulator stupidly incorporated copyrighted material that maybe it's copyrighted, maybe that could be challenged. But if you really want to go down that route, if you really want this to be the hill you die on, okay, good luck with that. Good luck with fighting Nintendo and every other publisher that's going to have a problem with that take on things. Good luck with that. I don't think you're going to win that battle. And the reason I say that is because, like, can you imagine, let's just say that you, as an individual, made something. You came up with an idea and you made something. Maybe you wrote a book. Maybe you made a movie. Maybe you made a game. Maybe you made a game console. Maybe you wrote an operating system. Maybe you made something of value, something that you would like to sell, something that is worth buying for other people. And you need to recuperate, you need to recoup your investment of time and money, and you've had to pay a lot of different people, and there's been a lot of different developers and things, people that have worked for you to make this thing that you have, whatever it is. And so you need to make your money back so that you can continue to make things, and that this thing can be successful and go out into the public and actually get attention and everything. So if you've made this thing, imagine you've made this thing, whatever it is, and somebody comes along and uses the source code or steals passages from your script or your book, or takes huge sections of your movie or whatever, takes things from your movie and just passes it off as their own stuff, or uses it to make their stuff better. Now, I know a lot of people believe that fair use gives you the right to just do whatever you want with anything, that you can just take anybody's stuff and just use it for whatever you want, as long as it's like, oh, well, you made a movie, but I'm making a video about this or whatever. Oh, you made a book, sure, but I'm making a different book, so I can just use your stuff. Well, there are certain ways legally that you can do that. Obviously, if you're doing something in a journalistic way, or if you're doing something that's transformative as sort of a way to evaluate something else that someone else has done, or discuss it, like, there are ways you can do that. But you can't just take copyrighted material and just use it in your stuff to make your thing. Okay? Copyright is a real thing. There's a reason why copyright exists. People have a right to protect their assets for the things that they make. They have a right to they put a lot of work into something, they've made something, they built something, and they have a right to own that. They have a right to sell that thing. They have a right to make their own decisions about what happens with that thing that they've made. That's their thing. They own that. So that's why copyright exists, to protect people who make stuff and want to make the decisions about what happens with those things that they've made, because they have a right to do that. That's their stuff. And it might bother us as gamers that Nintendo or whatever company decides they don't want to re-release a game on a new platform. It might annoy us that Nintendo has all these awesome games in their back catalog, and they're not doing anything with the they're not re-releasing them. They're not giving us an HD remake. They're not, that might annoy you, because you might be like, man, I really love this game and I really want to play this game on my new Nintendo console, but they just won't release it, and that's annoying. So I want to play it. Well, I understand you want to play it, right? I get that you want to play it. And you can play it through an emulator, right? You can go find you an emulator that simulates the old hardware and plays the old source code and of the game and everything else. As long as you figure out a way to do that in a legal way. That's whatever. It's cool, But if you can't figure out how to do that legally, that doesn't entitle you to take illegal measures to achieve that. Like, if the problem that you run into is that I can't figure out how to get this emulator to work with these games unless I take Nintendo's copyrighted material and use that to unlock the games, if that's the problem you have, that's your problem. You're not entitled to take Nintendo's copyrighted material and just make it part of your thing so that you can then make the decision about what you want to play with their stuff. Like you're not entitled to make all the decisions about what a company does with their stuff. And you're not entitled to take their copyrighted material, plug it into your thing at the source code level and include it as a part of that package, and then say, oh, well, I don't know what the problem is. I don't understand what the problem is. I mean, you're stealing their code, putting it in your code, passing it off as your product, and saying you don't understand what the problem is. I mean, in a different context, if we weren't talking about emulation, it would be pretty obvious that there's a problem with that. It would be pretty obvious that, that's not cool. But because it's emulation, and because people feel like, I don't know, because of the past 20 years of people feeling like, this ship has sailed, so to speak, and emulation is just fine and everybody should be cool with it, and anybody that has a problem with anything related to emulation is just being, they're the problem. They're the ones that have the issue. We sort of have this like entitled attitude. I'm sorry to say that, but I think that the early failures of big publishers and big gaming companies to address emulation created this sort of Wild West idea that like anything goes. And so any kind of measure that has come in after the fact to try to, address the problems with emulation or with specific emulators like Dolphin and what they're doing is kind of viewed by the general public to be, oh, get off my lawn. How dare you, tell me I can't play these games. The fact is that if Nintendo owns the rights to their stuff and they want to re-release some of their stuff and make money off of, their older games, their older library, they want to remaster them like they did with Metroid Prime or something like that. Or the re-releases they did for the Wii U games where they brought them out on the Switch. Or whatever, If Nintendo wants to re-release their virtual console games like they've done so many times and sell those games on the newer platforms, they have every right to do that. They own those games. They own the intellectual property. That's their stuff. That's what they own. That's what they've built. If we say we love what Nintendo does, right? Then you have to recognize that Nintendo did those things. They own those things. That's their stuff. And we're not entitled to their stuff. Now, we might have collectively as a community figured out a way to play their older stuff, right? We might have figured out through reverse engineering and all these other methods a way to emulate their stuff, but it's still Nintendo's stuff. And you're not entitled to those ROMs. You're not entitled to those games. You might think that you are because they're everywhere, and there's just this sort of blase attitude about like what ROMs are everywhere, and it's just they're all over the internet. They're free. They're out there. Well, that's a failure of companies to protect their assets, but that doesn't mean that that's okay. I mean, we've sort of gotten to where we just we think it is okay. But I'll tell you what should have happened early on in that process, many years ago, in the late 90s probably, is Nintendo and Sega and all these companies, there should have been, I mean, obviously, I guess hindsight's 2020, but there should have been some way for them to sell ROMs. ROMs could have been, there could have been a different way to protect the information in ROMs and stuff like that, and make a marketplace where that stuff was made available for purchase. Sure, there's always going to be piracy. There's always going to be a black market for things. But if these companies had made it easier to buy their stuff, their older catalog, I think it could have avoided a lot of things, obviously. And later on, Sega, Nintendo, even Konami putting out the TurboGrafx Mini. There's been a lot of these measures that have been made available for people to buy the older catalog stuff and play those games. So it was something that these companies sort of came to late on and didn't really fully understand until it was too late for them to really control. But that doesn't mean that we have a right to that stuff. We don't have a right. I have tons of ROMs. I have tons of them. I admit that. I have tons of burned CDs for TurboGrafx and Sega CD and Sega Saturn and 3DO and all of that. Sure, I admit that. If I'd have had the opportunity to buy like the ISOs for some of these things or the ROMs at a reasonable price, when I've had that opportunity, I have bought those things. But unfortunately, this is older stuff, and there's not always a good way to do that because it's just not made available. But that doesn't mean I'm entitled to that stuff. Just because I want to play those games, that's not a justification. That's one of the things that does annoy me a little bit about the retro community, is how people will complain and say, well, Nintendo's not making it possible for us to enjoy these games, and it sucks because they can just never make it available, and then for historical purposes and blah blah blah, we can never play those games. And I'm like, yeah, I understand that you feel that way. I understand that. But they own that stuff. They own that stuff. We're not entitled just because we loved playing a game on our GameCube, or we loved, playing a game on the Atari Jaguar or whatever. Just because there was some game that we loved and we had a great time with back in the day, and now we can't afford to go buy the old game that's out there on eBay or whatever, that doesn't mean we're entitled to that game and we should just be able to go get it and play it for free because we're just, it's just, we should just be able to. Nintendo has a right to their stuff. Now, again, I'm not any better than anybody else, and I'm not standing up on some high horse or sitting up on some high horse. It'd be kind of weird to be standing on a high horse, but you know what I'm saying. I understand. We all have things. We have games. We've taken steps that I think some of us have taken more than others, and some of us have sort of just been like, whatever, it is what it is. But I think if we're reasonable, I think if we're fair, and if we're logical, and we think about like what we're actually talking about here as far as ownership of games and the ownership of encryption keys that control the security process that's put in place by a company that owns assets. I think if we're fair, then we should recognize that Nintendo, it sucks that there's a lot of these old games that are not being made available for us to buy again. It sucks that Disney can put their old cartoons in the vault as they used to do, and then we all have to wait again for them to put them out again. We could make VHS copies of The Little Mermaid, right? We could make a DVD of The Lion King. Sure, we could do that. That doesn't mean we should. That doesn't mean we're legally entitled to that. It just means that it's possible to do that. But, justifying that by just saying, well, it's not my fault that I'm doing this, it's Nintendo's fault because they're not making it available. That's a cop-out. That is an absolute cop-out. Again, this is coming from somebody who has a lot of ROMs and a lot of burned discs and all that kind of stuff. So I'm not perfect. I'm not saying I've got some kind of moral superiority over anybody. I'm just saying there's a big difference between enjoying the fact that emulators exist and ROMs are out there and being able to play these games and, you know, having a great time. There's a big difference between that and then screaming from the hill about how horrible Nintendo is because they're not letting you get everything for free, or they're not doing everything you want for old games that you loved the way you want them to do it. It's their stuff. They can make those decisions. They have the right to do that. So I don't know if this makes any sense. I'm kind of all over the place here, but I just felt like there's a lot of like strong opinions out there right now. And I don't think that people appreciate or care about what really happened here with this particular situation. The Dolphin team screwed up. They screwed up. They did something they shouldn't have done. They, for whatever reason, didn't fix it. Valve asked Nintendo a question about it. Nintendo responded to that question and didn't even respond in a heavy-handed way. And Valve made the decision to take it down. Valve decided that. They weren't ordered to do that. They weren't told they had to do that. Nintendo asked them to do that, and Valve did that. So, if you're going to be mad at somebody here, you need to... the only party in this whole thing that I think really deserves some major criticism is the Dolphin team for including these encryption keys, being warned about it years ago, not doing anything about it, leaving them in to the point to where they had been in there. Okay. And honestly, Nintendo didn't even specifically cite that. They said there's a problem with the circumvention, you know, thing, but they didn't specifically call them out for the encryption keys, right? At least as far as I know. But even if they did, they were asked about it. Nintendo wasn't like studying them and going through everything with a fine-tooth comb and all this kind of stuff. And if maybe they have in the past, but Nintendo hadn't done anything about it. They weren't going after the Dolphin team. Steam, Valve asked Nintendo about this before they put it up on their platform, and then based on Nintendo's answer decided not to put it up. And people might be mad about that, but you're not entitled to everything you want just because you want it. You're not entitled to that. You might have it available to you because a company hasn't done anything about it, and that's cool. Like I said, ROMs, emulators, all that, that's cool. But you're not entitled to that. Emulators are not illegal. Emulators are not wrong. The process of emulating things is perfectly fine. Unless in creating your emulator, you do things you shouldn't have done. You incorporate stolen information, a BIOS, encryption keys, things like that. This isn't the first time somebody has put out an emulator with illegal stuff in it and had to have it taken out, or the project got killed. When people do stupid stuff like that, they put other developers in jeopardy. They put other projects under a microscope. There's a whole bunch of people that are good people, good coders, doing things the right way, doing the hard work, trying to reverse engineer stuff the way you're supposed to for an emulator. There's a lot of people out there that are doing stuff, that have projects out there that are, because of situations like this, going to have a hard look given to what they're doing, and potentially could get some scrutiny that they shouldn't have gotten otherwise. And that's unfortunate. I think there's a lot of people that have been put in a bad position because of the... I don't know. I don't know if it's laziness or arrogance or stupidity. I don't know what the explanation is from Dolphin. I really don't know. Because if the answer is, well, we just couldn't think of nothing else and this is what we had to do to get it to work, that's not an answer. That's not a good answer. You can justify that. You can come up with all kinds of like, well, Nintendo. I mean, you come up with all kinds of reasons why you think that you're entitled to do that. but you're not. You're not entitled to do that. So, anyway. In conclusion, do I think emulation is bad? Hell no, I love emulators. Obviously I love emulators. Do I think ROMs are bad? Well, I think if we're honest, if we're really honest about it, we could, we like to justify a lot of stuff. We like to say, well, it's for protection of this and for the preservation of that. And, they weren't doing anything with those assets anyway. And blah, 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 blah. We can say all that kind of stuff. And, oh, well, I can't get these games any other way because the actual games have been price gouged by all these resellers, and there's no way I could afford to ever play this game any other way. And I'm like, dude, I get that. You're right. That sucks. It sucks that I'm not ever going to be able to buy Panzer Dragoon Saga, for the Sega Saturn. It sucks that I'm not going to be able to buy some of these games that have come out for the NES or whatever. Sometimes when you want a cartridge or a CD or something for one of these old systems, the prices have been artificially inflated. I mean, I'm a TurboGrafx guy. Obviously, I know about this, right? And that sucks. But that still doesn't mean I'm not like owed the ability to play those games. Those games are owned. The intellectual property of those games is owned by a company. And if that company chooses to make those available in a way that people can buy, then that's fantastic. And if they don't, then unfortunately what that means is if you're going to play those games through emulation by acquiring ROMs, not ripping your own ROM, but like acquiring the ROMs off the internet, that's not legal. That's not legal. As much as, I have plenty of those ROMs. I'm not saying I don't. Right? I've played games that way for years and years. I'm not saying I haven't. Is it right? Well, no, I'm not right for doing that. Am I going to, if Nintendo sent me a message and said, we've figured out a way to be aware that you have all these ROMs, you need to get rid of them, otherwise we're gonna kill your Switch account or something, then I guess I would have to get rid of those ROMs, right? Because I'm definitely not going to win that war. I'm not going to win that battle. And that's what ownership of intellectual property is. So, anyway, enjoy your games, your emulators, your ROMs, enjoy your stuff, enjoy your real hardware, whatever. Have a great time. But let's just calm down with the, self-righteous indignation about what we think we're owed. And when a company is evil and bad because they protect their stuff. And that's not even really, I think, what happened in this particular situation. Nintendo wasn't going after Dolphin. They were asked a question and they responded to that. And it wasn't, it wasn't some DMCA takedown like we had heard. This was much less formal. I think that's pretty interesting. It's pretty interesting that that's the way this actually played out. And it's also interesting how the reactions from the community sort of blew this up into this whole other thing without really looking into it fully. And I'm as guilty as anybody for that because, like I said, my initial reaction to this was, oh, here we go with Nintendo again, And the truth is that, Dolphin... the team at Dolphin needs to answer some hard questions about what they're doing and why they did what they did, because I don't really understand it. Okay, well, that's it. Thanks for watching this. I appreciate it. Sorry to talk so long about it, but there was a lot on my mind and I just wanted to go into it. And I will talk to you guys later. Bye-bye.